Hello, my name is Steve Chastain with OR Colon Associates. Today, I'm hosting a video webinar to talk about an emerging technology known as remote online notaries. In the next few minutes, we'll look at what makes this different from an e-notary. We'll explore the essential components that make it legally permissible. I'll share an overview of the states where it's fully implemented, along with the status of the other states as of March 2020. I'll share a list of nationally recognized vendors that have met some states' requirements. Finally, I'll offer a summary of typical costs to help you in deciding if this technology is right for your organization's needs. Let's take care of a few disclaimers before we dive in. First, I'm not an attorney. No part of this presentation should be construed to represent legal advice or the practice of law. You should consult your firm's counsel if you require legal guidance as you navigate through this topic. Secondly, contact your Secretary of State's office for the latest information on what's legal in your state. Now let's get started. Notary publics are regulated by the Secretary of State of each state. Requirements differ, so I would invite you to visit your state's website to determine the requirements to become a notary public. Many states now require some sort of certification class and examination, which is often offered through a local community college. The importance of this information is that it takes time and preparation. Courses may only be offered at certain intervals, and the application process may require the signature of a local elected official. It may seem obvious, but for those who would ask, you must become a notary public in your state before you can become a remote online notary, and you must comply with employment or affiliation requirements. Few, if any, states allow independent RONs due to stringent record-keeping requirements, which we'll discuss later. Though the two are often confused, there's a critical difference between an e-notary and a remote online notary. While both allow for a paperless transaction by applying an electronic signature and seal to the digital version of your document, an e-notary must still physically verify your identity, which means he or she must be in the same physical location as the signer. A remote online notary uses video conferencing tools and sophisticated software to communicate, verify identity, and notarize your digital document. The notary does not need to be in the same physical location. Some states, such as North Carolina, where remote online notaries are not permitted, have recently issued safety guidelines advising e-notaries on how they might verify identity while maintaining safe social distancing. Today, no one is asking why a remote online notary would be helpful, but this technology is not a response to a global contagion. The need for RONs and the technology to complement their use has been around for quite some time. Virginia was the first state to make it legal back in 2012, and since then, a multitude of states have followed. If, like me, you've been working in a profession that routinely requires notaries, you also know that to become a notary, you must typically be a resident of the state in which you're applying. Sounds simple, but if your business carries you across state lines, as mine often does, then you may not qualify for that adjoining state. If your firm wins a project in a state where you have no previous local presence, you may have to locate a local notary and yield to their availability. Notaries are not ubiquitous, and even if they were, you now have to arrange for your business to be conducted at their location during their hours of operation. It is also important to acknowledge that some states now have education and testing requirements for notaries, which may present time constraints on your operational commitments, which you simply cannot afford. Finally, some states, such as South Carolina, require multiple witnesses to a transaction. A remote online notary service will also meet this need upon request. So now you and your signer can conduct your transaction in the privacy of their home or at your field office at a time that is convenient to your needs. Now that we know what an RON is and have a better understanding of how we might use them, let's talk about where their use is permitted. This chart reflects the status of all 50 states as of March 2020. As you can see, 16 states had fully implemented programs which recognized and allowed the use of RONs, and another 14 states had implemented temporary authorization under executive orders in response to COVID-19. The temporary authorizations have been routinely tied to a state's emergency declaration and may expire jointly with the end of the emergency. 5 states had bills introduced, another 2 had pending bills, and 13 had no bills introduced. Please verify your state's status through your Secretary of State's office to ensure you have the latest information. It's also important to recognize that even where RONs are permitted, most states have adopted approved vendors list and require that you use one of these vendors. Some states, such as Utah, specifically state that you must either be an employee or a contractor to one of the state's approved vendors. You may be asking yourself, why do I need a vendor for this? If I'm a notary, why can't I just become a remote online notary using my phone camera or the webcam on my laptop? The primary reason is that secretaries of state and legislatures are concerned with protecting consumers against fraud. As a result, states have mandated technical requirements for RONs which ensure the integrity of the process. This slide lists common guidelines that have been put in place in multiple states where a RON program has been fully implemented. The electronic seal and digital certificate signature are pretty straightforward and are commonly used by e-notaries. The changes begin with the use of the e-journal and webcam recording using picture-in-picture technology to capture the images of both the notary and the signer. Each of these digital records must be maintained and retrievable over a period of years and upon request. Each is subject to review and examination by their respective secretaries of state. Additionally, 2 software technologies being used to verify identity are identity proofing and credential analysis. Identity proofing uses knowledge-based authentication to verify a person's identity. One example of this would be to ask the user to provide the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. Using that data, the software generates a list of 5 questions specific to that Social Security number. The user is required to answer 4 of the 5 correctly, or they receive 5 new questions. Credential analysis scans the image of your government-approved identification, such as a driver's license, and runs that image through software capable of confirming its authenticity. In many ways, an RON can accomplish a more secure acknowledgement than an in-person notary might be able to accomplish. Now let's take a quick look at some of the available vendors. Let me begin by saying that the listing of firms on this slide is not intended to be a product or service endorsement. It was derived from an examination of firms which have been approved by some states based on their ability to meet those states' guidelines. It is offered only as a help in directing the viewer to a representative sample of vendors operating in the marketplace. The pricing data provided represents collective data taken from those companies' websites. Some of the firms provided pricing, while others asked that you speak with a sales representative about a quote for services. When you consider the cost of travel, your time, and logistics, the costs are not unreasonable. It was obvious from my review that pricing favored the subscriber or volume user over the per document price, which was commonly $25. Finally, there are several firms operating out of Virginia that offer national coverage. By that I mean that they will notarize documents in any of the 50 states, regardless of whether they have passed a bill or temporary authorization to permit remote online notaries. These firms employ only Virginia notaries, where the use of RONs has been legal since 2012. They hold that under the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution, which requires each state respect the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and under similar state provisions in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, that their notarial acts are legal. The Secretary of State of North Carolina, which is my home state, disagrees. In a recent statement released in April of 2020, she specifically said, "I must be clear with everyone that the current laws in place for notarization must be followed. This is for your protection and to ensure the legal validity of the matters taking place. At the present time, it is impermissible to perform a remote video or other remote notarial act until the General Assembly approves such action. Close quotes. Again, this is why we have attorneys. Let me leave you with these helpful links to the National Notary Association and the American Land Title Association. Both organizations have posted materials and links to helpful articles on this topic. Each maintains updates on changes as they occur. I would also encourage you to check with your state's Secretary of State website for the latest and most accurate material affecting your locale. I hope that you found this presentation helpful, and I look forward to sharing with you again in the near future. O.R. Colon is a full-service real estate infrastructure firm providing right-of-way, relocation, and training support to all industry sectors since 1969. If we can help you meet your project needs, contact us at orcolon.com. We've received some questions that I'm going to go through one by one, and then at the end of that period, we'll open this up for some additional questions or concerns that we can better inform you on this topic. So the first question that we had coming in on the topic in response to our video was, what happens when a remote online notary, such as Notarize or Doc Verify, or even an independent entity, goes out of business? Well, the short answer for that is, personally, we don't know what each one of those companies have done, but we do know that the states in which they are operating are requiring them to put in place methods and procedures so that their data and the data that they're storing, and as I mentioned on the video, in some cases up to 10 years, maintains integrity. So I don't think there's a scenario out there where any company is going to go out of business and the data that they've collected is going to dissolve. That's part of the reason that the states are requiring vendors to manage this so that they can control the technical side of the operation. Another question that came in similar to the previous one was, what happens to the journal entries and the recording of the RON events in the same instance as if one of these RON entities went out of business? And my answer would be the same. All of the digital data that's being collected will be maintained and will survive the company. Again, I can't imagine. I'm not a spokesperson for either one of these companies, but I know that the states have taken great pains to ensure that the data collected is stored and maintained in such a manner that it can survive that individual company's existence. All right. Another question that's coming in is, can a state legislature amend, update, change regulations on an ongoing basis once the state adopts and signs a bill policy for RONs? Well, I think the short answer is that a state legislature can amend or change regulations on pretty much anything. Those of us who work with CFRs have seen amendments and changes to rules and regulations with regularity. One of the particular items that you're going to see, many of these states have passed temporary provisions for the use of an RON, and those executive orders in most cases are written in such a way that they can be extended or modified as the state chooses. And so while going back to the state of Virginia, which is really the first in 2012 to put a bill in place, I'm sure that these aren't going to be static in nature. As technology continues to change, I'm sure the bills will have to be amended to address that. And as concerns emerge in terms of security and all the other things that deal with acknowledging documents, I'm sure we'll have some changes there. Okay, another question coming in is, what assurances can an agency have that the computer used by the person being notarized is not or will not be compromised? Is this a risk factor? Well, again, I'm not a computer IT specialist, but what I will tell you is that this transaction is being conducted or controlled, if you will, by the remote online notary service provider, which is not dependent upon your personal laptop or your computer. Beyond that is, your ability to have a good connection during the process. And so I don't think there's a risk with what's going on with your personal computer. There is a component of the process where you're required to scan an image or take a photograph of an image of the document that you're trying to have notarized. And so I can see some areas where that might be a concern, because they're, as I understand the process, they're going to take your scanned image, provide it back to you in a manner so that you can electronically sign it. So there'll be some optical character recognition involved in that, and if you've ever used an Adobe Forms type format, there are occasionally errors that occur. So but none of this is new. I would think these companies who are doing this on a nationwide basis have addressed those concerns. Okay, another question coming in is, what are we doing at the local field office levels to ensure compliance with each state? Well, that's kind of an internal question for us, but I will say, and I would encourage everyone to do this, and you saw this in the video as well. Our company personally is looking at this. We've got our IT department looking into the rules and regulations, and we are working with our individual states, the jurisdictions in which they operate in, to make sure that our use of the product is in compliance with states' regulations. And that's what we would encourage everyone to do, is to look at what their state Secretary of State is willing to accept in terms of remote online notaries. Another thing that I will say, since the video was presented, I know at least North Carolina is now presenting a bill in their state, and so we're seeing more and more states. I think West Virginia came online since I had the presentation made. So there are a lot of things in a fluid state at this point. So I would encourage you, again, stay in touch with nationalnotary.org or with the American Land and Title Association and your Secretary of States to find out what's legal and acceptable. And at the end of the day, if there's a risk involved, that's a decision that your company makes as to whether or not they're willing to take that risk. Now, another question that's asked is, how will this benefit the acquisition process? Well, I could spend a lot of time on how it will benefit the acquisition process. If you've been involved in trying to find a notary on a Saturday afternoon in map.usa, when you can't find a bank that's open or a used car dealer or wherever else you might conveniently locate a notary, you can readily see where this process would be beneficial. There are also instances I mentioned in the video where you need a witness, and you're either left with bringing a witness with you, or, which is twice the labor and twice the time, negotiating yet another schedule to coordinate with. In this case, the remote online notary service will provide you even with a second witness to the transaction. But the primary benefit is that it is in normal time. Now, right now, they're telling us that there are some delays associated just because of the sheer volume of the service in demand right now. But in normal circumstances, you could arrive at a landowner's house on a Saturday afternoon and have made arrangements to use the remote online notary service, log in, take care of the transaction in a matter of minutes, not hours, and conclude your business and go about your way. Whereas the alternate to that, or the alternative to that, is you meet with this property owner at their bank or at their real estate office or wherever, their friend, and you both get together and sign it, and there's 3 or 4 people involved in travel. So there are a lot of benefits on the acquisition side, both in cost and time and the simple logistics of it. Okay, another question that's come in is the video of the interaction kept by the host company for a certain period of time, forever, etc. As I mentioned earlier, I think that's a state-by-state provision. I'm not going to speak for all 50 states in the Union and the District of Columbia. I've certainly not read all of their bills that have been passed, but I do know at least one state had a 10-year requirement to maintain the e-journal and video record of the transaction. And so the answer is yes, it is kept for whatever duration the state would require it to be kept. All right, the last question that I have coming in on the list is what is or could be the liability a user company if that personal information is compromised and stolen digitally in the future? Well, I began this presentation by saying that I'm not an attorney. I don't practice law, and no part of this presentation can be construed as me giving legal advice. So I'm going to defer on that question to your individual company's legal counsel to address the risk concerns that might be involved. Certainly, personal information is always a concern regardless, and I would simply encourage the users of the service to respect the privacy and the importance of the privacy of the folks that you're interacting with and their information. That's the last question that I had coming in. So are there any other questions from any of those who are listening to our presentation at this point? All right, well, I appreciate those of you who have sent in questions for the video today. And again, my name is Steve Chastain with O.R. Cole & Associates, and I would remind you that if we can be of service to you in providing real estate, right-of-way, or relocation services, please contact us. We would be more than delighted to assist you in this capacity.